Alright, so that last video ended pretty abruptly, which was pretty annoying. Anyways, this other subject we're gonna talk about hasn't really been mentioned as much as like the abortion and the transgender issue that's going on. And even like immigration is covered more, I think. But this is also like a pro-natalist, like pro-lifer situation to try and confines people together to eventually make the mistake of having a child. And like it's not a matter of strong will because mistakes happen. Everybody makes mistakes. Like the point is they expect you to accidentally have a child at this point. Um, at least, I mean, this is pretty unpopular, I think. So, anyways, Louisiana Republican Party considers backing elimination of no-fault divorce. The Republican Party of Louisiana is debating whether to recommend the elimination of no-fault divorce, a change that would make it more difficult for couples to dissolve their marriage if enacted. The Louisiana Republican State Central Committee was scheduled to take up the resolution at its meeting Saturday, encouraging state lawmakers to eliminate no-fault divorce, but its author, Nicholas James, decided to send the measure back to the committee's resolution vetting group for more work. One Republican attending Saturday's meeting objected to the repeal of no-fault divorce on the grounds she might still be an unhappy marriage to a gay man if it hadn't been an option. The party leadership could still bring up the resolution for a vote at future meetings. The GOP members are targeting no-fault divorce because they believe it has weakened uh, of the institution it because they believe it has weakened of the institution of marriage. Quote, Louisiana marriage laws have destroyed the institute of marriage over the past 30 to 50 years, end quote. The initial draft of James' resolution reads, quote, the destruction of marriage has resulted in widespread child poverty in Louisiana, which just sounds just like population control type shit, but anti-poverty laws are almost like that because poverty is anyone, and it's just the whole demographic of people at that point. Um, I would say it's eugenic, but I, I mean, once it's population control at that level, it's more than just eugenic. You could say it's close to genocide. All right, in Louis, um, oh well, that's pretty off topic, I think. Sorry. In Louisiana, a no-fault divorce is one in which neither spouse assumes blame for the failure of the marriage. They are typically easier and cheaper to execute than fault-based divorces, where it must be proven that one spouse is responsible for the dissolution of their marriage. Fault-based marriage are more likely to result in lopsided allocation of spousal support, division of assets, and access to children. They are granted when a spouse is convicted of a major crime, convicted adultery, or abusive. Um, by contrast, a Louisiana couple seeking no-fault divorce must only prove they have lived separately for 6 months if they have no underage children and for a year if they have minor children. No responsibility for the dissolution needs to be found. King Alexander, a Lake Alexander Charles attorney who oversees the Republican Party's resolution committee, said the recommendation against no-fault divorce is not controversial among GOP state central committee members, but he expects judges and civil attorneys to put up a fight if the legislature seriously considers eliminating it. Without no-fault divorce option, civil courts could be burdened with more fault divorce hearing and couples who agreed to split up were forced to make or would be forced to make ugly allegations in order to dissolve the marriage, Alexander said. Wow, so They just want people to fight. They don't like a neutral breakup. They just want a culture where you blame someone. So it can't just be like, things happen. There has to be someone you point at. Man, that's really sad. And this is going to harm the children, this culture overall of this attitude. Anyways, Louisiana residents who have strong objections to divorce can opt into a covenant marriage, which makes getting a divorce more difficult. People in a covenant marriage who want uh, a divorce must go through marriage counseling and be separate for at least 18 months if they have underage children. In other cases, including those involved spousal or child abuse, couples in covenant marriages have to be separated for at least a year before divorce can be granted, according to the Louisiana Department of Health. Conservatives have championed the repeal of no-fault divorce laws across the country in recent years, but almost all states still have no-fault divorce laws on the books. Just two, Mississippi and South Dakota, don't offer no-fault options. In Mississippi, there's been a years-long effort to allow no-fault divorces. A task force concluded divorce was more expansive in Mississippi because it doesn't have no-fault divorce. Advocates for victims of domestic violence have also said the lack of no-fault divorce traps parents and children in abusive situations, according to Mississippi Today. Last year, a Republican senator in Mississippi filed no-fault divorce legislation, but the bill failed to get out of the House committee after conservative Christian groups objected to it. Um, yeah, this is pretty messed up. They're not really thinking of the children in as much as they're not like getting physically crippled and can still go to work and like be angry at their coworkers because they're wow, because their parents suck in this fucking culture of like pointing and blaming people instead of like allowing the understanding that neutral bad situations happen, you know, of course. All right, moving on. Um, all right. So these are some scans of the book Fewer that I took a while ago, actually, that I've been wanting to read. Alright, so in general, if you look up online, sperm count is still low, and since 2002 in this book, the average sperm count fell by 29%, and there have been such studies, but nothing definitive. Oh, sorry, I totally blocked out the fact that it was talking about the average sperm count fell in northern Scotland, and 7,500 men tracked from 1987 to 2002. Alright. Age of marriage, which brings me back to the article that I read in the past where we're basically okay in America with child marriage. Like, over half the country is okay with that, at least in terms of how the law is. I'm sure there's pushback, obviously. And the fertility fraud, which the age of marriage thing is more uh, relevant, I think. Alright. In December 2003, data from the National Center for Health Statistics showed that the average age of marriage in America was 25.1 years, and then it went up from 21 years, uh, and so they're basically panicking that people are having children older, even though overall, I guess it's true that like women have a clock, but it's still this like thing that they shame you with like destiny and that this is what you're gonna want because if you don't, you're gonna feel bad. This is what was promoted in the dearth birth by a bunch of women who with their own experiences trying to guilt women into having children by using their own experiences, typical natalist angle. All right. Money is pretty obvious. All right, so as contraception has gone up, fertility has fallen, obviously. Um, you can pause the screen if you want to read this, but I think I wanted to get to this. Countries with the highest divorce rates tend to have the lowest fertility rates. Okay, so, and this is probably why they want no fault divorce taken out, because even a neutral situation where they break up, they don't want that because that's not a culture of shame. And shame will bring people together in this sense where you will hide your pregnancy or the pregnancy happens because you don't want to say no, of course. Oh, um, divorce in 1960 in America, the rate of divorce was 2.2 1,000 population per population. It climbed to 5.2 in 1980. By 1998, it had fallen to 4.3. High divorce rates tend to lower fertility, obviously, because people have a choice in a democracy, supposedly. All right, to Getty, to Getty, what? Together, many of these items contribute to what is called the second demographic transition, a popular theory put forth by demographers J.D. Vanderkaa and Ron Lasharth in the late 1980s. It has been called by the European Association for the Population Study, quote, the mainstream concept among popular scholars dealing with the demographic change in European societies. In a word, it could be described as modernism. It includes falling fertility, cohabitation, childbearing outside of marriage, less formal levels of marriage, hold on, uh, divorce, sharing of housework, and new freedom of sexual behavior, and the urge towards self realization. Those who accept the idea of the second demographic transition believe it is irreversible and universal in developed societies. They have no idea about how to raise fertility. And he's speaking at nations, governments. The demographer Stephen Sindig, Director General of International Planned Parenthood Federation in London, says, quote, the question is not whether European states can boost their fertility, it's whether they want to. So that's a little spooky. There's just pro-natalists and Planned Parenthood that nobody would ever even think of because there's conservatives who are freaking out about Planned Parenthood killing babies, and that's the only thing that conservatives seem to care about, I guess. Um, all right. In theory, set up popular, proper levels, pro-natalist programs must work. Consider the current American plan of tax credits for children, a variant of European family allowance. Until the tax bill of 2001, parents of children received a $500 check per child per year, as if that's going to do anything. It was then raised to 1,000 child per year. Senator John Kerry has a plan to raise it even further, key to income. Obviously, since that's usually what we're talking about, well, one might say that 1,000 a year is not anywhere near enough to raise a child. True enough, how about 10,000 a year? $1 million? Sooner or later it will work. Too bad there's not enough of that kind of money around in America, in Europe, or anywhere else. So nobody is asking for $1 million or even $100,000 to take care of a child. Like, that's insane. Um, Of course, neoliberalism will frame women as wanting more and more and more, but that's propaganda at this point. Um, yeah, so that's that's just nonsense. And the money is there; it's just being hoarded, you know. Nobody cares about reallocating. Okay, so he points out that Bill Clinton said keep abortion rare, which we know that Democrats are not as they're not as harsh on that. Not all the time, anyways. Behind the scenes, they seem to be like pro-natalist, but conservatives are obviously like fascist, fucking like uh, So even though the Democrats are pretty much not helping the situation, they're still not really the threat, even though they're the red carpet for the conservative fascists, if you ask me. All right, moving on. All right, and I believe this is the last one I'm going to do for this video. So this is something I wrote a little problematic, honestly, using the term the Great Reset. But if there was any conspiracy that was happening, it would be something that if you read, if you've been paying attention to the Eugenics by Philippa Levine, apparently this is a pattern that has happened. But instead, COVID and pandemic have been just unfortunately in the mix, and so this has confused people and scrambled a bunch of the racist rhetoric and overall like issues that have been happening in America. It has revealed actually what has been what has already been stressed and what people are already thinking. COVID didn't magically cause stress and people to hate their jobs. It just opened the floodgates, and it was I don't know, an excuse to sort of say something. It was a good. I'm not saying it was an excuse in the sense of making it up. I'm just saying. All right. COVID was and is still bad, but the excuses in the name of and general responses during COVID. Oh God. Hold on. I'll finish that later.